Welcome to Hackon Online, everybody. On your right-hand side, you have the opportunity to ask questions. So if you have any, do enter them there. And it's a pleasure for me to present Omer. Welcome to Hackon, Omer.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, or at least virtually here. So thanks for the intro and for having me here today on your platform. So hi, everyone. Good morning. I hope you have some coffee with you or some tea, phones on mute, silent, and ready to kind of listen in and learn more about a real-world example of when we help protect a global Fortune 500 company that operates in critical infrastructure against DDoS attacks, ransom DDoS attacks. My name is Omer. I'm the product manager for Cloudflare's DDoS protection service. So I'm based in London. And basically, my team is responsible for protecting both Cloudflare's network infrastructure and our customers' networks and applications against distributed denial of service attacks. One thing that we've seen increasing throughout the year is ransom DDoS attacks. So, just as a quick recap, what is the difference between a ransom DDoS attack and ransomware attack? Because sometimes those could be a little, they can come up in the news, not necessarily always with the relevant context. And let's start with a quick recap of what a ransomware versus a ransom DDoS attack is. And then we can kind of just set the stage with a little DDoS trends to understand the threat landscape and attacks. And then we can kind of dive deeper into the real-world example and learn from the lesson that company shared with us. I also have added some Norway-specific DDoS trends into this presentation, so we can cover that as well. So in a nutshell, a ransomware attack, I'm sure you're all familiar with this, right? Someone mistakenly clicked a link in a phishing email. It installed some malware on your computer. It propagated to the network, encrypted, and they demanded they being the threat actor, usually Bitcoin to unlock your data. So it's essentially a denial of data service or attack, if you will. And usually it's quite complicated and expensive, or not expensive, but you usually need to know what you're doing to launch those types of attacks, even though there are tools that can help you execute this. So ransomware as a service type tools. The second thing, or as opposed to that, we have ransom DDoS attacks where the required expertise is much lower. So you don't need to get an email into the inbox of employees, and you don't need to make it look real and have them click the link. It's all much simpler. All you need to do basically is fire packets or requests or whatever it is that you're using at their IP networks, at their IPs, at their applications to DDoS them, and then send some emails with a Bitcoin wallet. So to be honest, all you need is a few VMs, HPing3, and a Bitcoin wallet. And of course, an anonymous or a disposable email address. So it's not really too complicated. And when we look at the statistics throughout the year, we ask customers that have undergone through a DDoS attack. There's like an automated survey that pops up so we can evaluate their satisfaction and what happened to get a better understanding of, is our product working well, but also what was the cause of this attack? And as you can see, the number of customers that have responded that it was a ransom DDoS attacks increased quite steadily throughout the year. Not too surprisingly, in November, 1 out of 4 respondents reported a DDoS attack. So you're looking at the ransom DDoS attack per quarter, but if we break it down by month, in November, that number was as high as 24%. So almost 1 out of 4 respondents reported being threatened or received a ransom DDoS attack. So with that in mind, let's kind of dive in a little deeper to understand the threat landscape and kind of what's been going on the internet. And so basically, we can see that despite decrease in attacks in the layer 7 and the quantity and the percentage of them out of the total traffic, DDoS attacks still increased almost 80% year over year. And we did see a decrease also in network layer attacks, but it was still the second highest quarter of network layer attacks that target IP applications and entire IP prefixes. Now, this correlates to a trend or to an interesting thing that we notice is usually when the amount of attacks go down, the total quantity of attacks go down or percentage, because it's always relative to the traffic, the number of larger attacks go up. So we saw larger attacks, longer attacks that surged throughout the year. Now, more specifically, we saw that attacks lasting over 3 hours increased by 87%. And also attacks lasting over 100 gigabits per second increased by almost over two-thirds, so by 67%. Now, keep in mind that the large and long attacks are still not the common. Most attacks are in the below the 1,000, or not below the 1,000, but in the thousands and hundreds of thousands of requests per second, or in the 100, 500 megabits per second rates. Similar, most attacks end within 10 to 20 minutes. And when I say most, I mean about 90+%. So the majority of the attacks are small. We even like to refer to them as cyber vandalism. But we did see this increase in larger and longer attacks. Now, when we look at the top attacked industries in the past quarter, we can see that companies that operate in the aviation and aerospace and events were the most targeted in Q4. Now, the way that we calculated this is we take the total number of attack requests that targeted that industry and divide it by the total traffic to that industry in that quarter. So the aviation and aerospace industry, over a third of its traffic in Q4 was, in fact, DDoS attack traffic. I think this kind of makes sense from the perspective that Q4 is a month usually where lots of travel happens. Holidays, New Year's, Christmas, and all of that. And so I think that kind of correlates to what's going on and how people are operating, and what at the time attackers see as potential coveted targets to affect. Something that we anticipated less, actually, was that in terms of network layer DDoS attacks, so this is like SYNFLOOD and stuff like that, the education management was the most targeted industry. So over 90% of traffic to the education management industry was DDoS attacks. That's an insane number. So only 8% of the traffic that we received to education management was actually legitimate traffic. When we break it down by region, we can see that in the US and Australia, the telcos was the most targeted industry. In Europe and Asia, gaming and gambling. In the Middle East, again, education was the most targeted. And in South America and Africa, it was actually hospitality. Now, when we look at the top attacked countries, and when we say, just to clarify, when we say top attacked countries, it means the companies that have a billing address in that country were targeted. So it's not that the country as a whole was targeted. but companies operating or registered or headquartered in those countries were targeted. And then we bucket it up and again do that percent of attack traffic divided by all of the traffic to those internet properties. And in layer 3-4, only 7% of the traffic that we saw going towards Chinese internet properties was legitimate traffic. So 93% of it was attack traffic, followed by Lithuania and Finland. Also very large numbers. 80% of traffic to Finland was attack traffic. And again, from the layer 3-4 perspective. And when we jump up the OSI stack to layer 7, we can see Georgia, Belize, and San Marino there in the top as well. Now, on the flip side, where the attacks are coming from, we can see that layer 3-4 attacks are coming from mainly in terms of percentages, Botswana, Azerbaijan, and Paraguay. And you can see the full list on our report that I'll share afterwards. But the way that we calculate this is a little different, though, because in layer 7, which is, you can see here on the right, we calculate the percentage of attack traffic based on the client IP, because we know that the IPs can't be spoofed. Attackers can proxy the traffic. They can use, of course, cloud infrastructure and IoT devices from those countries, and they might be operating from other countries, right, and attempt to obfuscate their source. But it gives us an indication of where the actual attack traffic was coming from, not to say that that source country was the attacker. But at layer 3-4, obviously IP addresses can be spoofed. You can change them, you can alter them, you can randomize them. So if we were to take just if we were to map the source country based on the source IP at layer 3-4, we would just get spoofed IPs. And that wouldn't provide us an accurate representation of what's going on. So instead, we use the location of our data centers. And we're able to get that geographical accuracy because we have locations in over 275 cities around the world. So at layer 3-4, it's based on the packets that was ingested. And we also have this breakdown on our report where you can also view it by region. And so, example, if I look at Europe as a whole, Norway wasn't in the top countries of where attack traffic is originating from. Only 6% of traffic from Norway did originate or was part of a DDoS attack. Now, again, this could be traffic that is backhauled or routed differently by ISPs, and that it originally originated from a different country, but was just routed differently. But this is the location of where we saw the traffic. Just as an example, we usually see a lot of attacks hitting our California data center, but in fact, it's traffic from China that was routed due to financial or operational reasons by the service providers themselves. Just going to take some coffee. And when we look at attacks on Norwegian websites, this includes all of the internet properties on Cloudflare of a Norwegian billing address. And so when we look at the total attacks or the total threats launched against Norwegian websites, which is in the hundreds of thousands, this includes, by the way, not just DDoS in this slide, but also application layer attacks. We can see usually that the average is about 1% maybe of attack traffic targeting those internet properties. But not surprisingly, in November, that number spiked by 36% or to 36%. So over a third of traffic to Norwegian websites was part of a DDoS attack or a layer 7 attack, SQL injections, or any type of application type of attack, including bot attacks, which again kind of correlates to the Black Friday and the other events that are celebrated in that quarter or in that month. And when we kind of shift around that data and bucket it around or bucket it by the industry in Norway specifically, we can see that over 1 out of 10 requests, HTTP requests to fashion and apparel websites was part of a DDoS attack. And I actually, when I ran this report, I wanted to see if this number of 11.6 is only because of November, because maybe during November there was a spike in attacks targeting fashion and apparel, but the rest of the year was, lower because of, again, Black Friday and Singles Day and all the sales. But removing November from the statistic didn't really skew the data that much. It's still very representative of what's happening throughout the year. Surprisingly, human resources was also very high. So almost 1 out of 10 requests to those websites were under attack. And then also surprisingly, religious institutions. And then finally, in the fourth place, an industry that we're used to see in the top attacked industries, which was the cryptocurrency. So I without a lot of context about Norway, I found this very interesting. And one thing that I do want to kind of mention, not specifically related to Norway, but more as a whole in the Western world. So we've seen over the past few days and week, we've seen an increase in DDoS attacks that have been targeting healthcare websites. And these attacks have been supposedly launched by a group called Killnet. Killnet is the name of an anonymous type group of pro-Russian hacktivists. They group on a Telegram channel, and they call to launch DDoS attacks, and they teach each other how to launch DDoS attacks. We haven't seen very sophisticated attacks coming from there. We haven't seen large attacks coming from them. I mean, the largest we've seen, this was from Friday, a 1.6 million requests per second attack. Now, it's a lot for a server that's not properly protected or doesn't have the capacity or scale to even ingest and block that or absorb and block that. But not from the Cloudflare scale, where we've seen 20, 30 million requests per second attacks. And this group also called to attack US airport websites. And this was in Q4. So if you recall, there were airport websites and airline websites in Q4 that went down. What we've seen throughout this campaign, this wave of attacks against healthcare websites, and the previous wave against the airport and airline industries, is that whenever there was some kind of outage or service degradation for those websites due to those attacks, even though they weren't sophisticated or or large, extremely volumetric attacks, is that the security settings of that website was just not optimized. I'll cover that a little more in the next section, but there are fairly simple things that you can do to significantly improve your defense in such cases. This group of Killnet has about, I think at the max, it had about 80,000 members on the Telegram channel. I think now it's about 40 to 50, 60,000 members of pro-Russians. And this is to contrast the Ukraine IT Army group, which calls for the same thing, to launch attacks on Russian websites and infrastructure. And if I recall, they have about 200,000 people in that group last I checked. And back to Killnet, we haven't seen there has been discussions around a botnet as a higher platform called Passion. We haven't seen a specific botnet or attack method being used. What we have seen is a bunch of attack methods, a bunch of botnets being used. So this kind of indicates that crowdsourcing approach of this anonymous style group, where they just, the organizers or the admins of that Telegram channel publish a hit list. Here are the websites that are on our menu for today or for this campaign. And then they teach each other how to use basic methods to attack them. Now, when we take a look at the kind of take a step back and more broadly look at the attack methods and the attack vectors, SYN floods have remained the #1 most popular attack vector. It has been the top attack vector for as long as I can remember us doing this report, probably around 2-3 years now. Why is it so popular? In a nutshell, a SYN flood is a flood of packets, TCP packets with the SYN flag enabled, right, turned on. So to successfully mitigate a TCP attack, you need either to be able to create a fingerprint for that traffic, so to identify patterns of, you know, these flags, these sequence numbers, these destination ports, or this TTL or packet length. So you'll need to be able to identify the fingerprint in order to mitigate the attack. However, if it's kind of fully randomized, fully spoofed, and there's no clear fingerprint that the system can detect and generate on the fly, what you need is to be able to classify the state of TCP flow. You can do this with capabilities of the Linux kernel IP tables contract capability, for example, so implement based on that. We've also implemented our own system called the Advanced TCP Protection System. I know, a unique name. But what it does is it classifies the state of TCP flows based on the ingress traffic only. So it's quicker, and it can overcome a use case of a asymmetrical routing topology with a direct server response to the client. And so even if you have all of those things, you need context to be able to mitigate the attack. But if the attack is randomized well, at the initial step of the connection, at the SYN connection, there's no connection to be classified. There's no connection, open TCP connection for us to say, does this make sense to receive a push ACK now? And so if you don't have that fingerprint capability, if you don't have that context to add to a stateless, to a randomized attack, then it becomes really tricky to mitigate SYN floods. It uses up, if you don't use up the bandwidth by the amount of traffic you're sending, so if you don't cause link congestion, what you'll end up causing to an unprotected property is just a server failing, unable to allocate additional memory to new connections or additional connections or existing connections, excuse me. And that can cause, of course, disruptions and an outage, and the inline appliance to crash, of course. The second two types of attack vectors are floods and reflections of UDP-based traffic, so DNS and UDP. This is very popular just because UDP is, by definition, stateless and doesn't have a lot of fields, so it can easily, or it's harder to fingerprint UDP traffic. Hence its popularity and the increase in its usage. And in the emerging threat landscape, we saw memcached, a significant increase in attacks using memcache to generate amplification attacks. This increased by over 1,300%. So again, it's an old attack vector, but still very popular. And similar to SNMP, right? The simple network mapping protocol, or whatever it is, to discover plug-and-play devices on your system. And of course, VxWorks, an IT communication protocol. This abuses a vulnerability or an exploit that has been discovered, I think, over 10 years ago. And it's still being abused today. So you can see, even 10 years after a fix was rolled out and everything, we're still seeing attacks over this, or abusing this exploit. So, and we see these types of attack vectors kind of changing a little, but there are those repeating concepts of that attackers are trying to use. They're trying to bring back always old attack methods, so trying to figure out if there are vectors that we kind of are no longer protect against because they're old. And it's always some kind of amplification or reflection attack, usually layer 7 protocols over UDP. And so while most of the attacks are cyber vandalism, we have seen attacks significantly grow. If a few years ago seeing an attack over 1 terabit per second was a wow event, now it's almost on a weekly basis. And even if they reach a terabit per second of traffic, 700 million packets per second, or 20 million requests per second, a lot of time those peaks are very small, short in their duration. So we saw like these surges for even as little as 15 seconds. So yes, these are initiated by humans, but the attacks are ultimately executed by bots. And so for the best approach, you also want an automated protection inline, because by the time that a human responds to a PagerDuty alert, the attack is already over and the damage is done. We've seen customers, and I'll cover this in the next example, that had network failures that lasted days and even weeks after the initial attacks. There were still finding out things that weren't running, and issues with their networks. And even when the attacks are not they're not sophisticated, they can be very persistent. So it's very interesting to see what motivation ideology and motivation can push attack or threat actors to do in terms of identifying your network, researching your network, and to try and find a weak point. So this is, again, one of the, I think, kind of ties back to the making sure that your settings or your security posture is optimized. So with that context set, that landscape understood, let's jump into this example of a Fortune Global 500 company that was attacked. We are not going to disclose their name because they requested to remain anonymous. After this incident that they had, we asked to speak with them to learn from what they learned, from what they experienced, so we could share the findings, because we do this quite often. And in this case, we found a lot of very interesting lessons learned that I think are not necessarily straightforward, but are very helpful. So I had a call with this company's head of incident response and threat intelligence. This is a European company, and it operates critical infrastructure in Europe. And so with their approval, we're bringing you their story, again, but anonymized. So quick, very high-level timeline, how it works. They were, at the time of the ransom demo attack, they were not a Cloudflare customer yet. They operate a few data centers around the world. And one of their data centers in Europe received or was targeted by a layer 3-4 DDoS attack. At the time, they relied on their ISP for detection and out-of-path mitigation. So their DDoS approach was, or strategy was, if we're under attack, we divert to the ISP's scrubbing center. They'll mitigate the traffic. And once we're back in peacetime, we route back and back to business as usual. So again, the way this works, the attacker will usually send a ransom note after they launch a demo DDoS attack. We've seen cases like in this attack where even the demo attack can cause issues. Then they'll usually give you a week to pay your ransom or else. And then usually, or not usually, but if their threat was not an empty one, they promise to launch a persistent DDoS attack that won't stop and will only increase and cause you outage. However, we have seen in many cases that the attacks actually never came, the attacks themselves. So this could be just an empty threat trying to find the gullible company that will pay the Bitcoin fee. Or as in some cases, what we saw is that what we hypothesize is, kind of similar to the approach of if I'm a thief and I'm walking in a neighborhood trying to find my target, and I see that this house has a camera and a security camera and security dog and a fence, but this house doesn't, then I'll probably leave that house alone and try that. I want to minimize my risks as a thief. So according to that kind of principle, if you will, it is possible that once attackers detect Cloudflare or security vendors in line, they just decide to move on to the next target. And so the pre-attack posture and readiness of this critical infrastructure company was not ideal. So the alerts that they had set up was only of attack posture, sorry, there was a noise that distracted me, or only of the CPU and bandwidth utilization. So that's how they learned about something going on in their data center. They didn't know it was an attack because they didn't have any form of inline DDoS detection or mitigation. So, no alert on abnormal traffic like nothing sophisticated, just CPU spikes and bandwidth utilization increased in one of their European data centers. And this was happening during the working hours. And they relied on their ISP, like I said, and they haven't used it in a while. They didn't have any reporting, any analytics, any telemetry. And as we will see, that the ISP didn't even know how to mitigate the attack properly. And they didn't provide them kind of that around the clock or follow the sun type of support when they needed it. So when the workday ended, so did the security engineers on the ISP. And they didn't really have any, run books or any, they didn't know what to do. And so when this demo attack hit and it lasted an hour, it targeted one of their data centers. It was about 80 gigabits per second sustained throughout 60 minutes. So while not a, incredibly volumetric attack, some would even call it small, it's definitely enough to cause an outage or at least some strain on your infrastructure if you're not used to those capacities and if you don't have any mitigation inline. It was a multi-vector attack. So UDP, MDNS, SYN, and other protocols that we won't mention just because we don't want to disclose things that could say too much. And once they realized this attack, and I'll get to how they realized that this was an attack and not a legitimate surge in traffic, they called their ISP. They began their rerouting to the ISP's out-of-path scrubbing center. It took the ISP about 30 minutes to mitigate the attack. So they had quite an outage that impacted their performance. And this is an example of the ransom email. It's not the same email from this specific case. I explicitly chose a different email, again, just to kind of add to the obfuscation. So, but the template is, I think it's pretty much, it follows the same principles. We've seen many threat actors claim to be responsible for the New Zealand Stock Exchange DDoS attack. Sometimes it was an advanced persistent threat group called Fancy Bear, sometimes the Lazarus Group. And these are real groups. So the Lazarus Group is the nickname of a North Korean cyber espionage group. Anything with bear is Russian. So Cozy Bear, Fancy Bear are names of either intelligence units within the Russian cyber units within Russian intelligence, or cyber hacker groups that are associated with the Russian intelligence. So we don't know if these emails, these attacks are actually launched by those groups or just by entities claiming to be them and using their name. But in any way, they scare you, they ask you for a ransom fee, then they plead to your ROI, your logical thinking, right? What do you prefer? Spending this much on Bitcoin to make the threat or the potential threat go away, or potentially suffering an attack that will cause you a lot of bad press, lost in revenue and reputation, and all of that. And one thing that we saw is that the email was sent to just random email addresses that are associated with the company, like help at, support at. So a lot of times the employees of that company that admin those inboxes just ignored it as spam. After their experience with diverting to the service provider's scrubbing center, they also had a lot of breakage in IPsec tunnels and other network communications that broke during that routing process. And they didn't have visibility. They were not satisfied with their ISP in that case. Some ISPs are terrific, and this one may be too, but in this specific case, they were not satisfied with the visibility and the alerting and no controls and kind of not understanding what's happening. And so they came to us, we onboarded them with our emergency response team. Our SOC took over, and our dedicated account teams and solution engineers helped. So they gained all of that visibility in real time, alerting and everything, and even those self-service capabilities that you can just tweak things from the dashboard yourself. You don't need to ask your ISP to do something. And we also helped kind of map their traffic behavior to some extent to ensure that we're decreasing their exposure as much as possible and reducing the risk of anything happening on top of the automated protection. And again, at the end of the day, the deadline expired and the attack never came. So like I said, it could have been an empty threat, or it could have been just that the attacker was deterred by detecting that Cloudflare is now advertising their IP prefixes from their ASN. And so it's a happy ending with a lot of pain points along the way. And from those pain points, we have 3 lessons learned. And so the first one is that don't rely on on-demand solutions that require human intervention and analysis just because it takes too long. Like I said, even a 2 terabit per second attack that we saw, the peak was like about a minute. So, and if that traffic already shuts down or causes your infrastructure to crash, you're going to have a long bad day ahead of you, days, even if the attack was only 2 minutes long. And my personal thought on on-demand solution is, I mean, we offer it as well. We have, if you want an always-on or on-demand solution or a mix of both for different properties, you can mix and match whatever flavor you want. But in having worked at a lot of security companies, I've seen that the on-demand solution was an architectural workaround for the fact that the cloud infrastructure of DDoS vendors was not sufficient. So a DDoS vendor that has a great mitigation appliance, great technology, and now their customers are like, hey, but we actually want this for the cloud. Can you put it in a data center somewhere so we can route through it? They didn't know how to build a cloud. They didn't really want to build a cloud because in some way it cannibalizes their appliance business of professional services, of licensing, and all of those revenue streams. And so they built something that could handle attack traffic under attack, but not all of their customers always on traffic at all times with excellent performance. Cloudflare is a cloud-first company, and so we can provide that. So This is just my take on why on-demand is just a historical mistake. And so the second lesson is to map your threat model and to increase your visibility. Again, better alerting and logging. So you don't want to alert on everything, right? Because alert fatigue is a real thing. I've seen it. I've seen it happen to our teams that are getting paged in the middle of the night for a nonsense alert. That employee is not going to be productive the day after. Instead, you want smarter alerts, smarter detection. So a detection of an attack, not just a increase in traffic searches. And if it's an attack, I actually only want to be alerted if it's above these many gigabytes per second or megabytes per second or whatever, because anything below that is just cyber vandalism and noise, and I don't care about. So you want to have the relevant, you want to have those customizable alerting and visibility components to give you the context and knowledge of what's happening on your network. And work with your DDoS vendor or whoever your vendor is as much as possible. Don't just rely on the automated mitigation. Automatic mitigation is excellent. I can tell you that probably around, I don't know, I'm guesstimating 95 to 97% of all DDoS attacks are mitigated automatically. The rest are either new attack vectors that for some reason weren't caught, or just too small of an attack, or some other reason, maybe the settings were turned off or not optimized. But you want to make sure that you tap into your vendor's full breadth of functionality. Firewall rules, threat intelligence, managed IP lists to be able to identify IPs that you don't want. If there's countries that you don't operate within, block them or challenge them if you want to give them some access. There's always things that you can do to improve your resilience. And a lot of times those tools and functionalities are just built into the platform. So by not using it, you're not tapping into all of that added value that your vendor already provides you and that you're paying for. And the third and final thing, and I think this is not necessarily a very, I think there could be more emphasis put on this in companies based on what I've seen. So prepare and raise organizational awareness, because as we've seen a lot of times when things happen, the teams don't know what to do. They don't know where to log in. Who do we call? So make sure that you have run books, the teams know what to do, and even drill them. You don't have to launch a real attack. You can if you want. We can help with that to some extent, and there are also vendors that can help with that. But if you're very techy, you can do it yourself with some HPing 3 running on VMs. And also train your non-technical employees. So like I said, in the case with the Fortune Global 500 company, the employees that received the email threats, the ransom notes, were operating the help at, support at, PR at, and those types. So attackers will send the threats to just publicly scrapable email addresses. And those employees just discarded it as spam. And that cost the incident response team a lot of hours in response. It was just when, the critical point when they realized that this was an attack, where someone called the response team and said, "Hey, I got this email. Like, do you think it's anything?" And then the security engineer that got the call kind of had that eureka moment and said, "We did have a CPU spike. We do have networking things breaking." So then they started looking through the logs and correlated it together. And so to summarize it, automated and always on solution, because again, most of the attacks are small. Prepare, raise organizational awareness, and remember that we can help. So if you want to learn more about how we can help and the way, the system that we have and the the solutions that we have, starting from the free plan, you're more than welcome to reach out. There are some QR codes here that you can scan. The first one is for the recent DDoS trends. The second one is on the recent attacks on the healthcare. We've seen attacks on European and US-based healthcare websites. And if you want to learn more, you can reach out to the chat here, ask some questions, or scan the last QR code here and have someone from our team reach out to you as well. So with that, I'd like to thank you and bring back Yermond to help us wrap up.
Thank you, Omer, for this real-world DDoS presentation.
My pleasure.
There are no questions for you at the moment. So I think that concludes our session.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Omer.
Perfect.
And thank you guys for watching.